Thank you so much for joining us tonight to discuss how we can amplify young voices in the media. The first person I would like to introduce you to is Ahmed Hassan. As Kathy said, he's the 2022 Victorian Young Australian of the Year. At the age of 18, Ahmed co-founded Youth Activating Youth, an organisation that's designed to support marginalised and disadvantaged young people. Ahmed is a director on the board of the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation and also a member of the Australian Multicultural Foundation, and has a lot of experience being a guest in the media. So Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I'd also like to welcome Jewel Topsfield. She's the social affairs editor at The Age and co-host of Enough, a podcast about youth mental health. The podcast was just one component of Jewel's extensive reporting on youth mental health around the pandemic. So I'm really excited to have Jewel here as well. Jewel, welcome. And last but not least is Jamila Sudi. As Kathy said, Jamila is a proud Dja Dja Wurrung woman from Yoda Yoda country near Shepparton. She's currently in secondary school and passionate about gender equality and hopes to encourage other young women to speak up about what's important to them. She hopes to become a journalist to tell stories that matter to her in the future. So it's thrilled to have her as well. Welcome, Jamila. I'd like to start because Jamila's had a recent experience where she was kind of in the media, and it was with the ABC's program Takeover Shepparton. And we'll just have a little bit of a look at what Jamila did with that program.
I'm a proud Dja Dja Wurrung Muslim girl, raised by some incredible women. I remember when my mum said she was going back to uni. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. She couldn't do it when she was younger because she had to raise 4 kids. Me, my 2 older sisters, and my little brother. Now that we're older, she decided to go back to school and study epidemiology. I'm so proud of her.
Now, Jamila, I might start with you after we've seen that clip. Takeover is, a ABC program that kind of helps young people learn to tell their stories. Can you tell me what that program was like and what you learned about the importance of young people being able to tell their stories in the media?
Going into that program, I was very nervous about it because I had no idea. I hadn't had any experience with anything like that or working with other children and youth with something so big. So when I got there, I remember thinking, I have no idea. I have no idea where I am or what I'm going to say. And then we got there and the team was so inviting, and we ended up doing different workshops and learning how to deal with the media. And we did these ideas for businesses that could possibly affect our community positively. And we got into groups and we pitched those ideas to different people who could possibly fund it. And we went on to actually end up doing those ideas. So it was really exciting. And we learned a lot about what it means to be part of youth in regional Victoria and what it means to be that next generation that is going to end up carrying on basically a legacy and end up changing the world with what we do.
Do you think it's important that young people's voices are in the media? And if you do think it's important, why is it important to have young voices in the media?
It's definitely important because sometimes you need to hear a harsh reality, or you need to hear something fresh and something new. You need to understand what life is like for other people. And people who have been doing something for a long time don't always tell the truth or tell it raw, like exactly how it's meant to be. So sometimes you just need to talk to someone else and get a different insight.
Now, Ahmed, you've had a lot of experiences with the media for quite some time now, being an early kind of campaigner with Youth Activating Youth, among other things. Can you tell me about some things you've learned about dealing with the media now that you wish you knew before your first interviews?
Don't just speak to the media whenever they call. Think about what's going on, what's the news around. That's the first thing I'd share. I used to get excited in the early days. Everything used to, every call that used to come along, I used to think, well, that's it. My voice is going to be there. But it's just more now you think about where your voice is going to be and what the story is. Is it something where you're going to add value? Is it where, is it truly representative of the people you seek to speak for? So you've got to look at it on many, you got to look at it from many different perspectives. And what I've learned very much is just, hear the journalist out, get those questions written to you. And then again, before they publish, make sure that they send your quotes that's about to go on the paper to you again.
And you've been involved in, different platforms as well. I guess seeing what they've written about you would be print or online, but radio and TV as well. How did you get your head around the best way to communicate across the different platforms when journalists are calling you up and saying, Ahmed, I need you to talk about such and such. Can you come on the radio in 5 minutes? Or you do an interview for TV, those kind of things as well.
Yeah. One of my toughest shows till today is the 3AW morning show with Neil Mitchell. I think I've spoken to him about 6 or 7 times. Still shake before I speak to him. I still talk to my dad before I talk to him because he's always a listener. But he's one person that, you can never predict where he's going to come from because he's always got some sort of a quick comeback to it. So you've got to almost be prepared. But I feel pretty much comfortable on live TV. I've done the long hour ones with Q&A, which again is really good, but it was a very good experience. I've never been in front of a camera for like an hour. So Q&A, and then you got to follow the conversation. I was behind a camera then. But just, I think the process of learning, because you've got to try it to know how it feels, and no amount of training can get you prepared for that.
You talked about feeling nervous before speaking to Neil Mitchell, but going back, 5 or 6 times. Why do you think it's important to maybe speak to audiences like the audience at 3AW, even though it might be a nerve-wracking experience to go on air?
Because you've got to challenge what's being said, and if no one challenges it, then it becomes the norm. And regardless of who the audiences are, whether it be the 774, 3AW, you've got to be able to give your point of view to a number of people who may not be on the same page as you, but may be willing to learn from your perspective. So it's all about perspective. It's all about, your experiences, what you see on the ground, and sharing that from a communal perspective. So, yeah, that's what I find very important to me. And I think going back a long time, I got told, don't complain about the thoughts and opinion pieces people write. Make sure you put your piece together, and also, try to fight it that way.
And what's your dad say in response? If your dad, have you got your dad there giving you feedback on how you went, or?
Yeah.
Is he a good sounding board?
Yeah, it's normally a 3 out of 10. Well, that's the truth. But well, again, but then he gives you comfort when he rates you so harshly. Then he says, Neil Mitchell gives, prime ministers and people who are very confident and have got like 4 or 5 media advisors a tough time. So that's what you feel comfortable at the end of the call. Yeah,
wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone who's watching at home. Feel free to use the Q&A function like Sue has done, and I'll answer those questions. I'll put those questions to our panelists throughout this hour-long event. Sue's asked, how do you feel when being interviewed and you have no right of reply as the segment or article is finished or published? How do you deal with that? I guess, Ahmed, that's probably best directed at you.
Yeah, it's very difficult when a story cycle is kind of ending, and you look at it another way, maybe sharing it through a positive story, or trying it in an opinion piece, or speaking, or seeing if different papers covering it. You never let people, or if something's going on, I don't know, an issue, but whether it be around vaccines, communities, around jobs and employment, or youth justice and anti crime prevention. A lot of people like to have an opinion on these things, but not know those young people that are affected. And, we always feel like we've got to put our point across. And sometimes, we invite the media to come to our offices, whether it be, the mainstream media or ABC, SBS, to kind of cover that off and give another perspective. And we reshare that on our platforms to make sure that, we've got a say in this.
Yeah, I guess we've got our own kind of publishing platforms now with social media that have quite a good following. So it's not as if there's, concentration in who can have a voice. Now, Jewel, as we kind of mentioned, you had done this really great, series of work with Enough. And I know, having lived in Melbourne, and I'm sure most people listening will have been in Melbourne or Victoria the last couple of years, that everyone's mental health suffered during the pandemic. I was interested to find out why you thought it would be good to focus on young people's mental health throughout the pandemic for this series.
Yeah, obviously because, our own children were being impacted and we're all homeschooling. And so I guess we're really seeing the impact of them. And my son's a bit younger in terms of where the core audience is for Enough, the podcast we did. But certainly, I would see he would watch the press conferences that we had here in Melbourne. And, I remember him coming in one day and saying, "Mummy, the coronavirus is going bananas." And so we're really aware of our own children and the impact it was having on them. But then also, speaking to experts, so people like Patrick McGorry from Origin, and even, this is a global phenomena where people like the US Surgeon General were saying that that youth were being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic when it came to their mental health. And this was certainly a trend that we were seeing reflected here. We were speaking to lots of psychologists that were saying that they had waiting lists, that had to close their books. So we were aware that it was a real problem and that young people were being disproportionately affected. And I guess what we really talked about at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald was how can we actually amplify the voices of young people? So rather than, I guess, a traditional kind of story might have been to say, one of the non-profit organisations had done a report saying, the impact, or a charity, the impact of the pandemic on youth mental health, and then we might have one case study and then maybe an expert. But we thought, how can we actually get young people to tell us in their own words what it is that they're going through?
And we'll have a bit of a listen for people who haven't heard enough yet to the introduction to the podcast, so we can get a sense of how it sounds.
I'm Jewel Topsfield.
And I'm Sophie Aubrey. And from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, this is the podcast about mental health in young people through the pandemic and beyond.
It's called Enough.
Enough stigma.
You're enough as a person. You're worth it.
Trying as hard as I can, I think that's enough.
I am enough.
And Jewel, we got a sense there of, just a few of the voices, the young people that you spoke to for that podcast. Can you tell me how you went about finding those people to speak to, and if it differed from how you might find, talent for a story more generally?
Yeah, it was amazing. People came out of the woodwork. Like, I remember going for a walk one morning. So it was in the middle of lockdown when we were only allowed to walk within our 5K radius. And I remember telling a friend when we went on our walk, we're thinking of this podcast and we're looking for people to be involved. And she just said, I reckon my daughter would be more than happy to chat to you. So I think we also went through some of the youth mental health organisations, so Origin and Reach Out, but we're quite surprised by even those within our circle or friends of friends. It felt like everyone knew someone who, was very keen to be part of it. So we're actually quite surprised at how easy it was to find people that were prepared to share their experiences.
And was interviewing younger people, was there any differences that you found than, interviewing adults that you might usually come across?
For me, for my generation, mental health when I was the age of the people that we were interviewing, it just wasn't something that was on our radar. I knew about eating disorders but didn't really identify them as a mental health issue. certainly, within families, say, we might say we're feeling a bit down, but that was a limit to my understanding of, what depression was like. Some of my parents' contemporaries would just kind of go off the grid and have a nervous breakdown, but it was all very mysterious and I didn't know what that was. So I guess, I feel like my generation just didn't have mental health literacy. And what blew me away was that I kind of tentatively approached some of these interviews and just how comfortable the people that we interviewed were speaking about, mental health and how, flawed it was for them. I guess that was one of the things that really impressed me, I guess, how candid they were, how prepared they were to talk about it, how normalised it was, which was, I found, really refreshing and hopeful for the future.
If you're just tuning in, my name is Matilda Morozzi. I'm from the ABC. I'm also on the board of the Press Club, and we're doing this webinar about how to amplify young voices in the media. Ahmed Hassan is with us. He's the co-founder of Youth Activating Youth. Ahmed, how well do you think the mainstream media does at amplifying young people's voices? And what could we do to improve?
I think it's got a long way to go, to be honest, to get not only young people's voices, but diverse voices through from many different people, from many different communities. I think it's probably doing okay. It's not even good or anything like that, but I think during the pandemic, especially, I was so pleased to see that the amount of people from many different communities that were being interviewed during the hard lockdowns of the 9 towers in North Melbourne and Flemington, the amount of young people, the amount of members in the community that were being given an opportunity to be a spokesperson, but also talk about their personal connection to those people that were being held inside and those people that were being held to also share how they were feeling was very powerful. And I personally remember how many people were on international media and they were sharing it with me as another young person, just saying that I'm on CNN, BBC, you know what I mean? Because it was just making global headlines. Some moments we tend to gravitate towards, but I think it's more on producers, more on director of news and the leaderships of news companies to realise that, no, don't get comfortable with the 4 or 5 experts you've got in the 5 different areas, and go to them. And when you lose one, just ask them for anyone else that they might know. But just have a list of people for different areas. And I'm sure we want to see that represented in all facets of society, not in just community issues, but sport. We want to have younger journalists coming through from diverse communities, which we are slowly seeing, but it's taking a longer period of time. How to improve that? Start mentoring younger talents, because there's a lot of young people who are very talented but don't have the right networks or opportunities to showcase that talent. And it's important on news companies, especially the larger ones. Young people, I think, just want to follow an experienced person around. They can pick up 1 or 2 skills that could be a valuable lesson for them to begin a career in either media or even learning to train themselves to be a spokesperson.
Yeah, wonderful advice there. And Ahmed, what would you say if there was some news directors here tonight, watching this webinar, about the benefits of having more diverse voices in terms of, not only the people being interviewed, but also, I guess, the people telling stories, the journalists? Why do you think that should be a priority for newsrooms?
Firstly, for them, they'll look at the growth of audience. For a perspective of a news director, the audiences will go through the roof and the ratings will be great. But it'll be great because people will actually genuinely tune in because you offer a different perspective. You don't offer the same thing as to other companies. You're offering a differing view that comes, that's not being represented in any other media. That's the difference. And then you kind of amplify the voices of young people, which is a second benefit. But it's that point of difference is that, others are not doing it. Why don't you pick up on it?
And I guess if people see themselves and their communities reflected in the news or in the media, it's going to be more relevant to them. And as you said, they're more likely to tune in, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's reflective of the people that they wish to showcase that, news to, and making sure that, we're better representing our society, which is becoming more diverse. Younger people are demanding, they're not waiting, they're demanding for things to happen and change, because we want to see different faces on TV, not just when we've got issues, that are relevant to that community, but we want to see them in all sorts of news affairs, in the weather, in the sports, in the news elements, so everywhere.
Now, Jamila Sudi is a high school student in Shepparton and keen to become a journalist in the future. Jamila, can you tell me, do you feel like you see yourself and your community and your friends represented when you're looking at the media?
As of right now, not really. I don't feel like there's enough representation for different people of different cultures and different religions in the media. And it's sad, especially because most of it is middle-aged white men who have been the main focus of media and of news for generations. And it's, like Ahmed said, it's getting better, but it's got a long, long way to go before people start to feel included and like their voice is being shared while someone else is talking.
What inspired you to want to get into journalism, and when did that first thought occur to you that this would be a good career potentially?
Well, it was when I was in year 8, and it was like in my story that I wrote for the ABC is we were talking about gender equality and we were having a discussion about that. And that was something I was really passionate about at that time and still now. And I stood up in front of the class and I explained my point of view, and it felt really, really good to talk about how I felt and what I thought on that particular subject. And I remember thinking, hey, you can kind of have a career out of this and you can talk to different people and get points of view and you can share your story as well. And it just seemed like the perfect option.
Has there been a time where you have seen yourself reflected in the media, and was that a powerful experience for you?
I've been watching the news before and I'd seen a Muslim woman presenting the news, and it just felt like, hey, we're moving along as a society and it's becoming better. There's more representation, but you still want to see it go a little bit further. It's not just a once-off thing, like a one-time thing that you see. You want it to become more constant. Like there's different people presenting each time and you want to see it change.
Keep your questions coming using the Q&A function. Tali has sent one through for you, Jamila. She wants to know, how does living in a regional area impact how young people are portrayed and heard in the media?
There's a lot less opportunities, I would say, in a regional area because there's not big corporations here, big news areas. Not a lot of things happen here that gets really heard. So if you want to talk about something or you want to share your experiences, there's very little chance that you'll be able to do it here. And I was one of the very, very lucky ones who got to do Takeover Shepparton when they came here. So I would say it impacts it in a way where you might not be heard, and there's a good chance that you won't. But if you're really, really willing to, that you could do it. It's not like it's not going to happen at all. You just need to be able to really power through, and it's a lot harder.
Jewel Topsfield's a social affairs correspondent at The Age. Jewel, I wondered when you were thinking about how to tell the stories that you collected as part of the Enough podcast. How did you think about, reaching younger audiences to make sure they were reading these stories? Because I'm guessing they're probably not the main consumers of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald.
Yeah, so that was one of our challenges. We'd made this podcast and we're hoping that the primary audience would be young people aged between about 15 and 24. And as you say, they're not the main demographic for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. So we always expected that there would be some parents that would listen and ideally share it with their children. But we also really wanted to try and aim at, try and get it to in front of young people independently of that avenue, I guess. So we thought with our presentation in terms of, how we kind of told the stories online and on video and on our social media, we really, I guess, thought of different ways of telling the story. So we did some Instagram, we did videos of some of the participants, which we posted online. And one of probably our most successful experiments, if you like, was one called Jack's Story. So Jack was someone who, a Year 10 student who we'd interviewed for the podcast, or he had been in Year 10 at the time that he was talking about. And he was gay. He came out to his parents. They were very comfortable with him being gay. He had a really good experience with his school that was very supportive. And then in Year 10, he had, what he now looks back and thinks was a sexual assault. That coincided with Melbourne's lockdown. He was incredibly articulate, and he talked about how this triggered, I guess, depression, a depressive episode. So we thought about how we could tell that story. And in the end, we decided to do it in this format that you're seeing, so a bit like a graphic novel, where I wrote a transcript after interviewing Jack, and then Matt Davison, who's one of the illustrators at The Age, obviously very talented, as you can see, told his story in this kind of comic-like format. And as I said, it was quite an experiment. We didn't know how it was going to work. We put it online, and the feedback we got was extraordinary. So that was really rewarding, I guess, seeing how a different way of telling a story can be quite effective and resonate with the audience that we were hoping that it would.
You've been in journalism for a little while. Have you ever thought to do something like that before? How did you come up with the idea that almost this, cartoon graphic novel might be a good way to tell this story?
Yeah, the Sydney Morning Herald actually did it a couple of years ago with the story of a Year 12 student who had cancer during her Year 12. And so, again, she kind of talked about how the chemotherapy dried up her acne, and they did it in this way as well. And so I guess when we were thinking, we had that in the back of our mind as maybe that could be, one of the approaches that we use telling Jack's story as well.
And what type of stories do you think does that format lend itself to? It sounds like those two were quite personal stories with young people involved, but is there something that you or the team thought ingredients that a story needs to kind of work for that graphic novel type approach?
Yeah, I think that certainly the person that you interviewed has to be very articulate. And also, if you notice, Jack, he kind of talked, like he was very descriptive in the way that he described depression. For example, he said it feels like it's wave upon wave crashing onto you, and you can't escape and you're crushed. And, he really actually used very, very visual ways of kind of describing what it felt like. So I think that helped, you need to, and I think you also need to have, some kind of quirky aspects to it as well. But again, I love the fact, say, Gabby, who the Year 12 student with cancer, she said, no one tells you that chemotherapy dries up your acne. And you hear so much about, the impacts of chemotherapy and losing your hair, but I've never heard of that. So I guess it's kind of, you need to have a good script as well, and one that can be easily illustrated.
And I wonder, is there any extra considerations you have to have when interviewing young people, or ethical things that you're thinking about that you kind of have to involve in your workflow to make sure you're doing a good job, and that the people that you're interviewing, the young people that you're interviewing, are happy with the experience or comfortable with what's happened?
Yeah, I was really mindful of this because we wanted the podcast to tell young people's stories, and we didn't want them to feel uncomfortable after listening to it or think that's not what I really meant, or also because the interviews were very long and obviously we're extracting certain parts of them, I definitely didn't want them to think, oh, that was really just a glib sort of comment that has been blown out of proportion, or I didn't really mean that, or on second thoughts, I wouldn't feel comfortable about my parents hearing that. I wanted them to have a good experience, or we wanted them to have a good experience. And
I guess you might interview someone for a couple of hours and then use maybe a couple of minutes of that interview. So if you've got, 2 hours of interview and you only take 5 minutes, potentially someone could feel like, oh, that's not really representative of my story, or that's a bit taken out of context.
Absolutely. Or yeah. So anyway, the short answer to that is that I made sure that they heard where they were, where we used them and the context, so that they signed off on it and they said, yep, I'm comfortable with that, that I'm fine with that. So, I made sure that they had veto rights, if you like, and if they felt misrepresented or on second thoughts they wished they hadn't said that, that was absolutely a prerogative to make changes.
Yeah, so it wasn't as if they were writing the script, but they could say that, no, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not representative. So that's kind of how you dealt with that, how the story is being told and what control.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So say, this didn't happen, but say if someone had said, actually, on reflection, I don't feel comfortable sharing the fact that I, attempted suicide or whatever it might be, then, I would have removed that. So that, as I said, that's just a hypothetical. It didn't happen, but that was, I wanted to make sure that people felt really comfortable about how they were portrayed. Also gave them the option of using their real names or their first names or a pseudonym, or, that was their choice as well. And also everyone who participated who was under 18 needed the permission of their parents.
And if anyone, or yourself, you have concerns about your mental health or the mental health of someone in your circles, the Press Club has put up in a chat some links to services like Lifeline 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue, Kids Helpline, Headspace. So feel free to check those out if you think they'd be relevant to you if you're listening to this, watching this webinar. Jewel, I wonder, I'm sure you spoke to people after the podcast came out and some of your stories. What did the young people say about what it was like seeing themselves, hearing themselves? What did they feed back to you about that experience?
Yeah, one of the interesting things for me was I interviewed a whole lot of social workers who they were studying social work at university, and they asked if I would do go on a webinar basically with them, and so they'd listen to all of the episodes, which was great. And of course they were perfect because they were quite young, 18 to about 22, so they were exactly the age range that we were targeting. And they talked about which episode resonated with them the most, and that was really interesting because what resonated with them was some of the younger, diverse people that we had interviewed who talked about that often in different cultures, sometimes mental health is spoken about less, and how, they'd navigated the kind of cultural sensitivities as well. And so that was fascinating. Like, that was really by far and away, I think that was in the anxiety episode. So it was quite interesting for me, it wasn't necessarily what I expected would resonate with people.
Now, Ahmed, you've been, as we've spoken about, in the media a number of times. Can you tell me about an experience where you felt like you were represented really well and what impact that had on you?
That's a very good question. I was represented very well. There were a number of times where I was given good opportunities, whether it be on Q&A. Q&A, you've got to speak for yourself. There was multiple write-ups either in the Herald Sun or the Age where the story was very positive. We didn't have any kind of negative feedback coming from it, from a communal perspective, because community are the first people to kind of let you know, that's not a good article to be represented in. But my toughest one, and I think would have been maybe chatting to 7 years after I got out from hospital with COVID in 2020. And then after that, I think the following day I did ABC 7:30, and I had to do this whole thing and share photos, and they wanted me to share family photos of, family members who were in hospital with me. And I was like, it was pretty tough, but the way it came out towards the end, even with the 7 news, the afternoon news where I spoke live to them, it came out really good, but it was very tough. Like, thinking about it, how would it come out? People didn't really believe in it. Why am I sharing my story? Are the wider family going to be happy with it? There's just so much to go about it. And then people just, you worry about what are the implications that, you sharing your story carries.
And so those stories sounds like were about the fact that you had contracted COVID and that you were sick. Is that what the content of the story was?
Yeah. And then after that, I had post doing those. Then I had people who kind of went on a tangent and said that I was lying and I didn't enter hospital, and was following all sorts of conspiracies, which then became very tough to navigate because why did I share my story? It wasn't to get to cause me more headaches and, people, giving me all sorts of negative feedbacks. But it just caused me more trouble to share a story like that, to be honest. And in the future, if something like that were to ever come up, I don't know if I'll share it because it's just a dangerous place to share it. And, because everyone was so angry and just took it out on me and said, the reason why I'm locked in is because of you and your family, because I told them most of my family had it.
And how do you deal with that kind of blowback if you've been in the media? What's your kind of coping mechanisms that you might have?
It's tough. It's not the first time it's happened to me. It's been like when I also, spoke about, when that kind of African gang crisis was around, and you'd go and speak about it, whether it be, on the afternoon news, on the morning radio and whatnot. And then you'd have people calling up your office, send you emails, send you messages and saying, look, why don't you just, take you and your community back to where you guys came from, and we'll all have peace and we can all live our lifestyles. And you'd get the most grubbiest individuals coming after you, which is tough. But coping mechanisms, to be honest, is to refrain from responding to confuse people. If someone genuinely wants to ask you a question and is respectful about it, respond by all means. But it's just to kind of think, and if the matter is too serious, then take it to police. That's the best way to cope, because people are just vile and just send some stupid things that you'd never anticipate will come your way.
Particularly when it's online, people kind of feel emboldened by the fact they can hide behind their keyboards. You mentioned earlier that, first when you would get a phone call from the media, you'd be excited and take up the opportunity, whatever it is. How do you now choose what opportunities you take up, which ones you don't, and what advice would you give to people about weighing up whether they should speak to the media and who they might want to speak to if they get offered the opportunity?
So in my early days, I used to get a lot of opportunities, and I used to look at it at every story, and you'd get maybe 2 comments, maybe 2 lines or something like that in there, and it wouldn't be really adding value. It wouldn't be impactful. You didn't shift the story. And years on, when you get training, what you see is that if you are able to demonstrate, and like we ran a campaign where we wanted more vaccines for members of the community who were passing away in high infection LGAs last year. And what we done was we ran a campaign on the front page of the Herald Sun. And therefore what you see is that, people start to listen. It's much more impactful than commenting, which I was part of a number of people who done it. But now what I see is that I look at the story and I say, look, I think I can add most value here. I'll comment, I'll add my views. If not, I refrain from it and maybe try to, point them in the direction of someone else. But just try to use your voice in a way where it's not just everywhere. It's not just that same old guy commenting, but it's just, it's needed, where it's needed you are, not where it's not.
I used to produce John Fain, who was a host on ABC Radio Melbourne for many, many years. and I was we were moving in the office or something, and he had a whole heap of folders of old rundowns that had been printed from back in the 90s. And I think I found the day for my birthday. I was curious and looked at who was on the rundown for my birthday, and there was some guests on that rundown who we were still talking to today, like nearly 30 years later. And so I think it just highlights the problems we have in going back to the same people. And they were talking about the same stories as well. Like I probably could have gone and cut out the audio from that interview from the early 90s and played it, in 2022, and it would be kind of the same points they were making. So
and like so refreshing to see people like Jamila now coming up and saying, look, I want to play my role, I want to do something, I want to spec up, because that's the kind of that's the kind of attitude you need to bring to it. Like a lot of people used to take there's not a lot of people who will be supportive of you, but there'll be a lot of critics in the beginning. Then you'll start to gain support because you'll be taken seriously. So to younger people coming up, take that first step. You'll be lonely. A lot of people say, what the hell are you talking about? But just do it for the sake of doing it. But make sure you speak, substance. It has substance about what you talk. You know what you're talking about. But also don't be afraid to mess up and go again, because I can't imagine the amount of times I've messed up. And I remember a pack of media, my first time, a pack of media coming to me and just looking for me and another guy, because we were the black guys in that whole room in the MCG. It was in 2016 or 17 when Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton did a youth summit to solve youth crime. And it was all police, detectives, and just government people. And we were two young people that were there. I was about 17 or 18 at the time, 19, if anything. And then they all came to us and they all put the mics to our faces and they're like, righto, tell us, is this going to get sense? I'm like, and he's like, I was like, yeah, I messed up. And I watched myself on the news and I was stumbling so bad. I still got that video saved just as a memory, man.
I think anyone looking back at themselves in video or audio can be a bit uncomfortable, even if you feel like you've been articulate. But Jamila, I want to go to you. I'm curious to find out what media you consume, and on what platforms do you consume it?
Well, through obviously now media has become a lot more wide ranged rather than just on the TV or in the newspaper. Most of the media I consume is online through Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, Facebook, stuff like that. So social media has become the main platform for news and other media. So, and it's become a lot more easier to access it too. And you hear from a lot of different points of view. So I think that really did something good for the news and for media, is you can find different communities and different people talking about things you want to hear rather than just what you should know or what people want you to know.
And when you think about, working in journalism in the future, what kind of job do you want, or what kind of stories do you want to be telling?
I don't know. That's the thing. I'm young now, and I think most of what I just want to talk to people. I just want to talk to people. I want to hear their stories about their lives. And I think that's the most exciting part of journalism, is just being able to get those stories and make sure people are heard. And that's what the people here are doing. And I find that so amazing. It's just I'm talking to people who are where I would like to be in a few years. It's great.
And do you see a pathway forward for you to get into journalism? And what might that look like?
Well, paths vary. It's not certain and it's not set, but I know where I want to go. So hopefully it's a smooth path, but I know there's definitely going to be some bumps, and I'm just looking forward to it. It should be fun.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, do you have connections at media organizations? Do you plan to go to uni? What are the kind of things that might help you get to that career that you want, or that might be challenging for you?
I think uni. I think I would definitely like to go to uni, Melbourne University particularly. And obviously working with ABC has helped me a lot, and I've done a few different things with them by now. And that's definitely been helpful towards becoming a journalist. So going to university, doing more with the ABC, it should help.
Can you tell me about your experiences with the ABC? What did you do with Takeover, and how did it inform you about the best way to tell your story in the media and how to get your stories represented in the mainstream media?
Well, when they first came to our school, they did a little workshop in our class where they taught us how to write a story that was explaining a particular part in your life that impacted you. And once I'd put that through the competition and I'd found out I'd won, we did this summit with, I think, 43 other kids. And we were split off into groups where we would develop different ideas that could help our community. So they taught us how to think about what we needed in our community and think about the needs of other people who we wanted to kind of not cater to, but help. And I think that taught us how to think of different people, think of different views, how we could include other people's views into our own so we could make something that was unique and based off of a bunch of people's different ideas so we could form something that would help everyone.
And what's your view on how the media could do a better job of amplifying young voices? Do you have any pointers for people who are working as journalists or directing newsrooms?
Just don't be afraid to talk to people who aren't the common people, aren't totally easy to talk to, haven't had any obviously everyone's had different problems or issues in their life or something they have something to talk about. But if someone is of a minority, then don't be afraid to just go say, hey, what's your story? Go to different people, find different communities that you would like to, just get in depth with. So if you start doing it, then other people will, and it'll become more and more of a common thing.
I wonder, your backgrounds, there's a few different threads there in your background, as is common for many Australians, but I was speaking to some of my friends who were, from different cultures, and they said that they wouldn't get into journalism because their family didn't think it was a respectable career. Maybe they wanted them to get into, medicine or engineering or accounting. Is that something that you think you come up against, where maybe in some communities journalism's not a career necessarily to aspire to, and potentially that's why not people from some communities aren't aiming to get into that kind of industry?
Yeah, I do come from different backgrounds, which has evolved into its own little culture in my house. But there are cultural differences when it comes to different jobs and different careers. Obviously, there are the ones that do think medicine is more of a respectable career because of money and stuff like that. So I haven't come up against it myself. People around me have been very supportive of what I want to do in the future, but I do know there are other people out there who don't have that support system behind them because of their background and the culture they come from.
And it sounds like your mum was actually a bit of an inspiration for you as well, going and doing what she wanted to do, even if it was, maybe a bit later than she initially planned to do it, going to university.
Yeah, she did end up going back to university and doing epidemiology because she had kids pretty young and she couldn't finish her university. So that was a big inspiration for me, that even though it was 20 years late, she still went back and did what she had to do. And that was just incredibly inspiring for me.
We've only got, about 8 or 9 minutes left. So if anyone watching the webinar has any questions, please use the Q&A function to put them in now, and I can try my best to put them to our guests. Jewel, I wonder if you could talk about, the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Is it something that's spoken about, trying to get more young voices, more diverse voices in the paper?
Yes, definitely. So we've done quite a bit of research into what it is that young people are looking for. Also, I guess that kind of, and something I'm really mindful with my reporting, that whole thing about nothing about us without us. So, I mean, I use that to kind of try and inform my coverage on other issues as well, like disability. But yeah, certainly thinking about how we can get more young voices, and also asking what they want from the media and what they're not getting. So one of the things that we experimented with, so some of the feedback that we got was that often in mainstream media, there's a lot of assumptions. So you might be writing about inflation, say, and there's a lot of assumptions about what inflation is and what stagflation means. So now we're doing things like incorporating explainers into pieces, you know, trying to contextualise a bit. One thing that we did during the election that went really well was an explainer on how voting works, you know, what preferential voting is, you know, maybe having a video on the day in the life of a journo on the campaign trail. So I guess just thinking about how we can, you know, attract younger readers. They gave us, and one thing they said, which I thought was really interesting, they said, which the ABC does really well, is just dot points at the start of stories that really distill the information, and that was something, you know, that they really appreciate when they're time poor and just want to kind of understand something very quickly. So some of the feedback was really quite interesting about what we can do to make our journalism more accessible.
Yeah, I still don't understand what inflation is. I've read a heap of explainers, but I don't know that I could, you know, synthesize what it is now. So that was really interesting. So you actually, you know, going and just asking, like, what do you want from the media?
Yeah,
and getting some really concrete examples, like dot points at the start of stories, which I know I'm a big fan of as a reader. So.
Yeah, it was amazing how, what concrete examples they gave of what they would like to see. Yeah.
And have you noticed the composition of your newsroom change in recent years to be, you know, a bit more diverse? Obviously, there's young people coming in all the time, but there might even be more young people at the moment because there's been some extra money, I think, for a lot of newsrooms to bring in more cadets and trainees and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we've just got a range of new trainees, and I know that certainly, you know, I feel that they're starting to really represent more diverse communities, which is really exciting. Many of them speak, you know, second languages. We've got a fabulous journalist, Najma, who speaks Somalian. So, yeah, we're starting to...
I know her.
Yeah, she's wonderful, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. So we're really, you know, starting, and already you can see with Najma that she's really, you know, added value by kind of tapping into those communities that historically we just haven't had access to. So you can actually really start to see, you know, how useful that is for the age.
Sue Allison's just said, using the Q&A function, that the Daily Oz on Insta is great. Would love to see more young feedback on news styles, and I'm wondering if comedy is an important component for reaching younger people. I don't know, Ahmed, what do you think? Do a bit of comedy rather than straight news presentation all the time help?
Yeah, Daily Oz, the way they do it is just, is just great, to be honest. I see it on Instagram every now and again, and kind of have like 2-3 slides, and it just kind of explains everything, and they give it a bit more context if you want to do a bit of in-depth reading. So yeah, I think it's going to be just bite-sized chunks, because people can't, you know, I remember the Age back in the day, you've had to like try to open it up, and it's just so long, it's got so much information. And I remember my dad used to tell us to actually read the Age every weekend, because it used to be such a big paper back then.
It was a big broadsheet.
Yeah, it was just
hardly
a big
fit it on the table.
No, you couldn't read it. You couldn't read it on the trams, most certainly, because it knocked a few people over. But just generally, it used to have so much in it. It used to have these, used to have just so much in it. But just generally now, and I think the Age has also changed the way it reports on things now. It's just more trendy, I think, in the way it looks to engage with different audiences, and especially younger audiences. But obviously having the diverse voices also report, and it also opens new ways of engaging. So like now the Age starts doing, you know, just a couple of slides also on their Instagram, various other places. Then slowly people start to say, look, I'm just going to follow this and stop taking my news from elsewhere because it's just easy to understand.
And Jamila, I wonder, how do you feel about, potentially a future in the media and how the media deals with young voices? I'm just keen to hear if you are confident about a career in the media, if you're excited, if you're nervous about the future of the media. What's your take?
I am nervous, but I'm nervous for the fact that we're not there yet, but I would love to grow up and see us get there and be part of getting there. So I am very, very excited to start my journey into journalism. And I would love to see the media become more diverse and be part of that.
I guess we need brave people like you to put your hand up and say that, yes, I'm willing to give it a shot. So I'd really like to thank you, Jamila, for being here with us tonight. As you've all heard, Jamila's at secondary school in Shepparton, and she's an aspiring journalist, and I'm sure you'll be seeing her, whether it's online or on your TV or hearing her on radio very soon. And we'll also please thank Ahmed Hassan. He's a 2022 Victorian Young Australian of the Year and the co-founder of Youth Activating Youth. I'm sure you've seen him before in the media, and we'll see him again in some of the great advocacy work he's doing supporting marginalised and disadvantaged young people. And Jewel Topsfield is Social Affairs Editor at The Age. If there's anything you heard about that Jewel's done, the Enough podcast, the Jack's story, I think we'll be putting links to them in the chat so you can go and check them out. I highly recommend listening to the podcast. I found it very enlightening, and as Jewel said, learnt some things about mental health literacy that I didn't pick up when I was growing up in high school or anything like that. So I'd encourage you to check them out, and also check out the work of Youth Activating Youth, or I'm sure that some of your stuff, Jamila, is up from Takeover Shepparton, so people might be able to read your story or see some of the stuff that was produced as part of that experience. Is that right, Jamila?
Yeah.
I appreciate your time. I'd also like to thank Emily Coolidge, one of the staff members at the Melbourne Press Club, and Kathy Bryson for helping put this event together. Emily looks after all the tech stuff and making sure everything works. I'm also always confident in her hands. And to thank Vic Health for sponsoring tonight's event. We appreciate your attendance and your questions tonight. If you're keen to come to more events by the Melbourne Press Club, head to our website, melbournepressclub.com. We're always keen to get your suggestions about what you'd like to see or hear or come to in person. So you can contact me. I'm at Marozzi_M on Twitter. Send me a message and we can see if we can put on the events that you're looking for. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your attendance, and thanks to our panelists. I really enjoyed tonight's conversation, and I hope that you did as well.